Hi, everybody. We're back. This is for episode 2 of Infernal Intercourse with me and Pastor Brian Antonio. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about the nature of God, especially as it occurs in this show. So take it away, Brian. Some initial thoughts on the nature of God in Lucifer.
I thought this was the most fascinating thing that kind of crept up on me. I wasn't consciously paying attention to it till later, but that this, for most of the seasons, like we said, maybe up until late in season 3, God is kind of like that absent, dispassionate, maybe like abandoned God or failed God or just distant God. And that doesn't make sense really with a lot of how this internal canon of this show is working, but I think it is an interesting thing because it allows us to project our view of God, which is what so much of religion does. And it reflects the Bible too, and that sometimes the Bible talks about a God that's very involved and has a personal human kind of an image, and other times God's just way out there. And it seems like, that's the point of the Bible really, is each little story is that community's view of God, and there's not really one view presented of God, but yet we have to believe it's the same God over the whole thing. So that is a problem here. I think like you and I have discussed on our own that God changes here, and God shouldn't necessarily change probably. But
Yeah, so we have, I guess also for just storytelling, it's hard to have an involved God who could do anything. And then how do your characters have any problems that aren't immediately solved by your omnipotent character? So in a storytelling sense, you have to have a distant God, but they also just seem to have this God where he's just, he doesn't seem to do anything. He lays down these rules that we keep being told. Amenadiel, I think, is like, well, you're not supposed to live among the humans. You're not supposed to have, interactions with humans. You're not supposed to this. You're not even supposed to kill. And now Lucifer's killed both an angel and a human. And God seems not to have noticed.
Right. That doesn't seem to be God's concern, right? Like,
right.
Murder doesn't seem to be the ultimate sin against God, right? In this, that is interesting. Well, I think it's interesting because, coming at it from a progressive theological contemporary view, this idea that God is all powerful and omnipotent, but God chooses to be in relationship with us, right? We're in God's image and God leans near to us. And so maybe even God gives up some of God's godness to be in relationship with us, right? But in the show, I see a little bit of that whole idea that they talk about God as being in an intimate relationship, but we don't see that. But instead, we do see that traditional view of God, and that why do bad things happen? Well, some of it, not all of it, but some of it is because of our free will. And I think this show really, really looks at that ultimately God respects our free will, so much so that hell here is created by our own free will and our own regret over that. So I think that's interesting.
Okay. So we've got this, never been explained exactly what Lucifer did to get kicked out of heaven. And he seems to be the only one who gets kicked out. So he's the only one down in hell that is an angel. The very last shot of season 4, we see him on top of a throne that's on a big tall pillar. And I read that the producers made that shot specifically because in that episode they say that hell has to be run by an angel. And so that is one of the rules apparently that I guess God isn't breaking. And so the reason that the throne is on this hundreds of foot tall pillar is that you have to have wings to get up there. So that was their thought. Apparently. Even
though Lucifer originally chopped off his wings and they were
once he got to Earth,
yeah.
and then it tracked him on Earth, so he couldn't have flown back at that point. So
that's interesting, and I don't know if there's some allusion to something biblical in that. I don't remember that only an angel can run hell. But I think it's important though. Maybe Lucifer is the most human, right, of the angels, and again, another thing for us to talk about another time is how these other angels don't seem to be very good folks. And yet Lucifer seems the most good of the angels in a certain way. And maybe he runs hell because he's the most human, and so he's the one that's going to have to interact with the humans in hell.
Okay, so but back to God. So we have this God that we never see. We do hear from him briefly in that last sort of tacked on episode of season 3, where he just says that he wants all his children to be happy. Okay, but we don't see a lot of him doing things to make children happy.
Right, exactly. And I think it's funny because early on I kept saying, they kept saying Dad said, or, they're revealing to us what these conversations God had. But it really wasn't consistent. And I almost thought, well, are they trying to say that God is just whatever, our excuse forever what we want, right? Like, so every time somebody says, oh, God said, that's well I want, so I'm going to say God said, right? So.
And I think they bring that up at least once where someone's like, I can't remember which character said it, but something like, did you actually hear him say those words or something like that? Or did you just feel like he said that to you or something? So it's like, apparently God, it's okay, or there is some precedent for God to have just sort of communicated a feeling, and then you're supposed to interpret it, even if you're an angel. So you're still kind of operating on this, did Dad really say that, or am I interpreting this incorrectly?
Well, that's important because, again, I mentioned before that Lucifer, Satanael, is a archangel, and that is the role of archangels, right? When humans don't get it, God literally sends an archangel to speak to them, to tell them, to show them, to make it happen. And so that kind of confusion, Lucifer can speak right to us and makes it very clear. And I think we believe Lucifer when in the show, and I guess in real mythology, when Lucifer speaks, I think we all listen. But there's Saint Michael, Saint Gabriel, those are famous ones. Saint Raphael, those are in the Bible. But that's why they come. Like Gabriel particularly got one who speaks like God, right? God. And of course, in Christian mythology, Gabriel's important for speaking to Mary and Joseph. So that idea that these archangels can speak for God to us, but yet in this series, God, I think you're right. I think it's like, yeah, did God really say that, or is that just what you want and you're blaming God? Which is what the real world is like nowadays. I think almost anybody who speaks for God, I find suspect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they don't seem to know what God wants, the angels. People are certainly, not operating like they know, and so, but God is not really present, except we kind of get in that the second season where he goes to the psych ward, and there's a guy who thinks he's God because he's got it is the second season. He's got the belt buckle of power there or whatever, and so he tells his son that I'm really proud of you, and then Lucifer gets mad. He's like, well, I know you can't really be God because my father would never say that.
There we get. I think when Lucifer speaks, I think we have to take that as the most accurate depiction of what the series thinks God is. But I think they're playing a lot. I think they're playing a lot with satire of how people use God. I really do. And like you had said earlier, in one of our conversations in the past, you said something about how if God was overactive or really involved, it's really hard to build a story around that. But I think they are playing a little bit with how humans use God or invent God, or I always say quit blaming God for that. But that seems to be what I think the story writers are playing with that for us, to using that as a satire, a social critique.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining me for episode 2, and we'll see everybody for episode 3 in a bit. So thanks for watching. Bye.